This pretty much sums it up. I really love to travel, and I feel like it really makes me come out of my head and into culture that I enjoy. But traveling locally is just as interesting as well. Um, so what started was back in the 80s, I got a camera for my first time, and I overbought. I bought a camera that was heavier and more sophisticated than I'd intended. And with that, I started to travel into the jungles of Central and South America to do some work for non-governmental organizations I was working with. And even though I had a background illustrating, I found photography to be an incredible way of getting into the world and seeing nature more closely than I had before. So what ended up evolving is my use of that also led me on towards design. I studied design and illustration, as I mentioned before. But photography always stayed with me in all the pursuits that I did. And I wanted to talk about the visual storytelling that grew with me as I became a better designer, a better illustrator, and a better photographer, because they were all linked together, as I'll show you why. The thing I was always about was curiosity. I asked so many questions, my father would shake his head, say, "You're always asking, you're always asking. What are you going to do with all that information?" But I learned to be curious, curious about who you are. So be curious about who you are. Be curious about what you don't know. Be curious about where you haven't been. Be curious about who you haven't yet met. And invest in the time it takes to do what you love. These are things that our world sometimes swallows us up in, and we have to remind ourselves to take time and to ask questions, and to ask questions when you travel about yourself in the place you're in. I love this quote by Oscar Wilde: "Be yourself, as everybody else is already taken." So as a kid, I wandered the beaches of Cape Cod, especially after storms when they'd cough up all kinds of things from the deep sea. And it was phenomenal to get up very early and be the first people out there, my dad and I, or my sister and I, and just check things out and see what was there. And so I became an intense observer of nature. The other thing I loved so much was trash day, picking things up and taking them home and dissecting them, just like I did some of the shells that I collected to get the animals out. So I was intensely curious about all kinds of things. One of my favorite things in the world was to be in the woods and discover something that nature had left behind. And it started a trend as I grew up, just collecting things and examining them. So heading into natural history sciences was pretty much a shoo-in. And I really wasn't much into math or history, so I really delved into the sciences. Along with that came entomology, studying insects and drawing what I saw in nature. And it ended up becoming part of my living to create digital illustrations and composites with photography. So really, my first photography was about nature. And then secondarily, I used it mostly to create elements for these kinds of photo compositions. And every 10 years, I would do a self-portrait to sort of look at who I was and to take the things that were occurring to me at the time and put them into a visual context. Once I put those up online and did enough of them, it started to attract work. And my work shifted from being graphic design into illustration, always with a camera. I love this quote too: "The best photographs begin in your heart and not in your head." And I found this to be true because I grew up pretty sensitively, and I was always aware of how I felt about things, sometimes even more quickly feeling that than thinking about them. So when I first moved to the West and had great exposure to farmlands and agricultural lands, I really sunk myself into it and spent a lot of time camping and sometimes asking people if I could stay in their driveway overnight in my car just so I could get up early in the morning and see what was there. And that's part of the curiosity. And Paul will recognize this. This was a shot I made last year in the Alvord Desert in southern Oregon. And it was just a way for me to get away. So one of the things that I need to do is get away from the humdrum of the city and get into vast spaces and literally just breathe and see what it's about. And this happened that very night of that last photograph, just standing by my van and using my headlamp to be able to read the dials of my camera not realizing that I was lighting up my van until the exposure was made. So sometimes miracle things happen when you least expect it. And then you look in the viewfinder and you see something that you love and you go back and make it more purposefully. But none of this is news to you because you all do it. But the thing is to always slow down and see what's there. So here's some questions to help you define your artistic vision and how you'll tell stories. Because in the end, the word storytelling isn't just a cliche in our world nowadays. It's really true, but we never thought of it that way, perhaps. But the truth is that every photograph you take, if you put your mind and your heart into it, will tell a lot of people who you are. So what draws you in? The light, the shadow, the emotions, movement, abstraction. People are attracted to different things and at sometimes different times. But traveling out in my van to different places in the US, this is Zabriskie Point down in Death Valley. We all know that it's worth getting up early or staying up late and getting the best light. There is no such thing as bad light. Even midday light's incredible when you can use the shadows or the overcast to light up places that can't be seen in harsher light. But what stories do you naturally tell? Are you a talker? Are you telling personal stories to your friends? Are you talking about concepts, documentaries, nature, whatever it is? Tune into what you're really, really good at, what you naturally do, and make notes of it. It sounds crazy. We're all adults here. We've done this trillions of times in our brain. But it's really important to slow down and take a little bit of personal stock and see what it is that really draws you. Especially, I talk to my students about doing their personal projects with this in mind. I love birds. I'm not a birder, but I like them to be in my photographs because they punctuate all the man-made structures around me with something natural. They also take skies and make them better, and they create musical notes for your eyes to bounce around the frame on. What emotions do you want to evoke in your photos? Nostalgia, mystery, joy, solitude. For me, relaxing from my humdrum days in my busy mind, I like to go to places that are soft and ethereal, whether it's paddling my kayak on the water, taking walks. Fog is absolutely like it's a calm drug to me. No matter where it is, it calms me down, softens my vision, and it gives me something beautiful to look at. It's not as commonly seen in Seattle where I live. I thought it would be when I moved out to a very wet place, but it's not. But when it happens, I don't care what time of day or night it is, I will be out of bed and out with my cameras. So what influences you? Life experiences certainly do. People, culture, literature, nature. For me, looking closely at nature, as you saw in earlier slides, is something I'm really, really dedicated to. But I'm also really interested in the beauty that happens in people's lives, how they set up the reverence of their loved ones. So growing up in Boston, I was surrounded by a lot of incredible old graveyards, but they all looked about the same. They were gray, they were green, they had beautiful trees, they were silent. But when I went to Mexico, especially in Baja, and saw the cemeteries there and how they set up altars and shrines to the dead, putting in favorite objects, photographs, religious iconography, and flowers, I was blown away by the beauty that they used in order to honor their dead. And I made friends with a lot of families in that area and photographed it for about 4 years. The closer I got to these and the fact that they were open and you could step up to them without fear, I got a better glimpse into humanity in that countryside. And having met some of the families of the people whose graves I photographed, it was wonderful to hear their stories, and it sharpened my terrible Spanish. So I really believe that photographs are made by you, not taken by you, because you're slowing down and you're considering what's in the frame. Well, this is something I think about. And I don't do all of this all the time. Sometimes I'm too full of joy to even think about these things. I'm just in the moment. I'm feeling the energy. But whenever I can, I slow down, maybe taking a break from photography in a foreign city and have a cup of coffee or some local sip. How can I make photographs that capture this place with authenticity to this culture or the scene and with my own vision? So one of the things that I spend a lot of time in when I'm photographing is how can I get to a place in this scene, whether it's a plaza in Italy or a field in India, how can I get to a place to see this differently than I've seen it before? I do a lot of internet research before I travel, but what I'm really after are pictures I haven't seen before. Those are the only ones I really want to make. And if you're simply not feeling the light, the color, or the mood, try and replace your disappointment with what can I create out of what is here. Very easy to feel discouragement, and it's good emotion. Discouragement, disappointment, they're good emotions because they tune you into switching gears and realizing that it's all there if you lift that veil off of your heart and your brain. This is the Palouse, which anyone who's been in Northwest has seen. I've been there many, many times, probably over 30 times, sometimes just for a day and a night, and sometimes for a week or two. And when you go there, you never know what the weather's going to have done to the landscape. This was an early spring trip where the wheat fields hadn't quite sprouted all the way, so we got a much more varied color palette than the green on green on green on green that we see so much on the internet. And it was an interesting thing because I saw some of the disappointment in some of the people I was with. Now, this was done in late May, so we were quite early, but this was a weather trend in that area that was always green by then. And it was interesting because we went through the week photographing, and the students realized that there's a lot more there than what they perceived they should be seeing. And one of the things that I emphasized was when you see an image like this and it doesn't quite meet your expectations, think about another way of photographing it, or think about another way of processing it. So what I did is I showed them how to process black and whites out of the photographs that don't look so wonderful in color. And it becomes almost miraculous that the green on green on green does not translate very well to black and whites. And why would I want to take a colorful place and make it black and white? Well, it turns out that of the photographs I've sold of the Palouse, the black and whites sell 5-1. And I think it's because they're unfamiliar and they're more painterly and they're more abstract. So always be thinking of not only how you photograph differently, but think about how you might also envision your process to get what it is that you want the photograph to feel like. So let's take a look into the Palouse. I'm heading there this June and possibly again in July. And always, 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 we're looking for these patterns, these waves, these beautiful hills, sinuous waves. It looks like Tuscany in America. That's what people call it. And we're always trying to find the thing that punctuates these landscapes to have a little bit of piece of mankind in there, to see some structures, something detailed. And it's really a miraculous place, but it can change. As you can see from the hills in the distance, they don't have the same light as the hills in the foreground. So the light shifts. Your vision is shifting with it because you're looking for the shot. You're always trying to find what to frame and how to frame it. There's poetry in the distance if you tune into it. And the harvest time becomes a much different color palette. So I think that what's important to me is to return there in different seasons and see how the place changes. As I'm doing that, I'm meeting different people. They're not farming in the winter, but they're different and they're doing different things. They've got their livestock, or they're spending more time with their friends or at church, or who knows what, bingo. But I love seeing the different light patterns and taking the same piece of landscape or the same region and interpreting it differently. Being there in a full moon is quite a treat. And being there when the canola is bright yellow is an astounding, eye-opening, heart-opening, mind-blowing, colorful experience. It is tricky sometimes to be there at that exact time, but we always try. Another place that I love to visit there is this age-old home, and I've met the owners, the granddaughter, Carla, and she's a wonderful and generous person. and allows people to park there and photograph. And the interesting thing for me is that each time I go, the fields change. Sometimes they're canola, sometimes they're wheat. So they change their color and I respond to them differently. When it's clear skies, I'm pretty bored there because what I really want is this mood. I really want something dramatic. I love heavy weather. Growing up in Boston and on the shoreline of Massachusetts, we got a lot of hurricanes and they were some of my favorite moments. Elsewhere in the Palouse, I love to find these old relics and interpret them in all different ways, but it's these skies that add so much personality to just what would be in an old truck. Another thing I do is try different ways of processing it. So this is more of like a tinted version. So sometimes I like to play a little bit with how do I make this photograph feel a little bit differently? And then finally taking it to black and white, and you still get a different vision of it. So make sure that you're trying this with some of your favorite photographs and see how different the emotion is of the resulting photograph. Come in and grab the details so you can tell the story of the details of the decay or the build, the workmanship, the beautiful design that's no longer happening in our cars. Make photographs that have personality and choose your aperture, your speed, your ISO, whatever film simulations you might be doing. Choose them carefully to correctly render an image with consideration as to what happens in the foreground, midground, and the background. Always put your body where it should be. And that means trying different things and sometimes getting out of your standing height, kneeling, bending, lying down, doing whatever you can to find different ways of photographing your topics. I love abstract painting when it's more linear than when it's battered and crazy, but I love seeing old buildings that have combinations of decay and workmanship gone awry. And then there are the trees that attract people from thousands of miles to photograph these beautiful old cottonwoods and other kinds of trees there in the Palouse. A strange artifact of this is that I went to see this tree a couple of years ago and it wasn't there. And I asked around where it had gone, and they said the farmer chopped it down because too many people were parking their cars there and putting up tripods. And it was blocking our farm equipment. So we're also curious that we sometimes forget to realize that we're on private lands for the most part, and our effect and our impact is felt there. So other ways of just seeing a little bit differently, this fence around a barn there has been there for an enormous amount of time and it's been photographed 1,000 ways. But I just thought it would be fun to use it as a frame and to create sort of a rhythm of the wheels and do it that way. And I'm also really interested in storytelling about the religious figures there, as well as the church, this church in Idaho that I go to every year. And I thought that it would be interesting to use the church in the background out of focus and focus more on this beautiful gravestone of a young girl. And I told myself a little story, as I often do when I photograph, in order to build somewhat of a thought of what does this picture mean and how can I make a series of pictures that are related to it. So the story I tell myself is that since her death, this girl has seen 1,000 setting suns. And these little things just sort of trip around in my brain and give me a bit of connection to the thing I'm looking at, even if they're not true. They're true for me. Going inside the church, I see the simplicity and sparseness, and I'm very attracted to the simplicity and sparseness of this. Not highly decorated. It's a very old church. It's a founder's church from the settlers who started this area, and I have access to it by permission. And so one of my favorite things is to create symmetry in photographs because it feels powerful to me. It also feels calm and reverent at the same time. So I let go of the rule of thirds and all the other rules that I pretty much ignore anyway. And I try to go for what feels the way I want this place to look to my viewers. There were actually 3 other people in the church with me, but the exposure is so long, they've disappeared. I go for the little details and I use a wide aperture in order to soften some of the parts of the photograph so that your eye goes to where I want it to the beautiful lettering on those sound pulls. I don't know what they're called for an organ, but we all know what they do. The other artifact that make this place special, that tell the story of the settlers there. So for me, the Palouse isn't just the beautiful fields and the old cars and trucks and the interesting characters at the diner. They're about the history there and how I can come home with a full story, from wide landscapes all the way to the details that make this place so unique. So I get together with locals and I find out, how can I contribute back? What do I need to do? What church do I need to contribute to? Or what farmers can I buy coffee gift cards to? And just get a little bit of familiarity so that our groups are allowed to do things with tripods that most groups don't. I always want to see the history. So we have a Victorian mansion full of beautiful objects. And it's just another part of the Palouse. And it's so funny because on some years, the people are so excited with the landscape that they don't want to go indoors. But this is the reward for taking that chance and seeing how the other people live there. I tell myself a story about this truck as well. It's just a simple old beat up rusty truck, nothing really there. Doesn't even have any glass left in it. But I tell myself that an old farmer used this truck every day, do his work. And I tell myself that he listened to the ball game, maybe even on a little AM radio with a little earbud in, or it was blaring out of the old crusty speakers on that truck's dashboard. And I tell myself that he had a collie or a border collie with him, or maybe even a German shepherd or some other dog that you would have on a farm. And that he and the dog went for miles and miles and miles to do their work. And that story is just my own, but it's the one that attaches me to the picture and makes me pause long enough to try to make something out of what just looks like a rusty vehicle. I want to take you now to some of my favorite places because I want to talk about authenticity in photography, both for a visual way, also to talk about how to really think about yourself in these cultures, and also authenticity and how to photograph the people there. When I travel to a new place, I open myself to a process of discovery. I sense my edges of uncertainty, and I feel more alive and responsive. This is Hoi An, a very famous place in Vietnam on a river, and this is a festival of lights. There was a lot of things that happen on this river, but this is where the tourists go and they get to ride in these boats, and it's just such a cacophony of light. And I use the widest angle lens I have in order to photograph it. Later, I did a lot of correction on this to straighten things, but I actually like the energy of this place. It almost feels like it's falling off the earth. I love the chaos of imagery. I love the chaos of spaces. And I find it interesting how everything in Vietnam is times 50. Like the amount of things you see is always denser and more plentiful than any other store I've ever seen. People are warm and friendly, and I treat them the same way. And I always ask permission or at least gesture that I'm going to make a photograph. I'm not really into the paparazzi thing. I like to get close. I like to see what's there. And these are really travel snapshots for the most part, but there are some of the images that I'm showing you here that really have a lot of meaning to me. The others I do for magazines and for myself, and just to remember who I met and where I was. For me, I like the gritty. I grew up with gritty. I grew up in harbors and on the streets. And so when colorful gritty happens, I'm really alarmed. It's just one of those things my eyes are not used to. I'm used to Brooklyn and Boston gritty. So I love it when a culture naturally uses color in a way that we don't in ours. And I'm always going for something that attracts my eye. And it's so easy for us to see something and then be distracted to do something else. And you really have to listen carefully to how your brain is responding when you see things. And don't let people talk to you when you're photographing. There's lots of time when you're having dinner or lunch to do all of that. But when you're out photographing, tune into yourself as deeply as you can. And this is an example of getting down low. So I talked to this woman the best I could in our mutually difficult language conditions. And she told me that she was waiting for her husband to come with a fresh load of snails, and I should find him as he comes up from the sea with a new basket. But as we talked, I keep photographing. So even if I can't speak to somebody, I create some kind of connection. And through gestures, I try very hard to make pictures of them doing what they do naturally and not looking at me. I'll get the one where they stare at me like the woman with the vegetables did a couple shots before. And I'll get them to do the thumbs up. Some of them show the OK symbol with their hands. But what I really want is their natural gestures. I don't care if a photograph's not perfect. If there's a couple things at the edge of the frame that don't make sense, I'll either retouch them out or I'll leave them there if I don't care that much about them. But what I do care about is a sense of depth, and I care about the backgrounds. I really care about seeing something happen in the frame, a human gesture, when at all possible. And I microcompose in order to get more into the frame and more happening than not. I could have easily moved 2 steps to the left, and that woman would have been clear of the hose and standing on her own at the shoreline. But what I do is I take the photograph, I move in micro amounts. I might kneel a little bit, or I might squint. I might do anything to keep changing the story as I move around the scene. Same thing here. I don't care if my pants are full of fish sauce and fish juice, so I'm on my knees. And when he came down to take the fish from her, or the shells, whatever they were, he just about tipped into the frame, and I only got one shot of his face, and it turned out to be half out of the frame. And I actually really like this. I like it that way. And it reminds me of the immediacy of street photography and how you can't predict what's going to happen, but you can think a little bit about what might happen as you see someone walk towards a vendor with money. So you've got to be quick on your feet, or on your knees in my case, and think about where you have to be, have your camera set ready, and also do no harm. I don't get in people's face. This photograph here has got the chaos I love. I put on a longer lens in this case in order to pack those boats together. So I think I was shooting with about a 200 here. And there was so much to look at, and I could photograph here for an hour, and I'd see lots and lots of other compositions. But mainly what I was interested in is what's happening between the basket boat and the side. So I always want to frame both the land, the long shot, as it were, and I also want to get up closer and see what's there. So I do love zoom lenses when I can't walk off a dock and get closer. Nowadays, with the quality of our cameras, we can zoom in. We can zoom in post and reframe and recrop. But I try to do as much of this in camera as I can for obvious reasons. I want to protect the amount of megapixels so that I can make prints if I need to, or so that I can crop even more if I need to. I'm not a purist when it comes to framing. I'll do whatever it takes to make the photograph say what I want it to say. But the gestures are all important to me. There's got to be something happening. That's part of the story. I finally bought a drone after years of waiting to see how silent and how small they could get. I got lucky a few years ago and bought one. And it lets me do something I've always wanted to do, which is fly and see from above like the birds I love so much. So it's been an eye-opener for me and a new way to create patterns. I'm not that good at it yet, and I've lost it in the water a few times. But here's another place that really caught my eye. And I've been trying to go back for the last few years, and one thing after another seems to get in the way, but I'm really going to count on doing it in 2026. It really blew me away when I went there in 2017, and I can't wait to go back and take some people with me. But talk about authenticity. This is a place where I know I have a complete language barrier in most of the places I went. But I was very lucky that a fellow photographer asked me to co-lead a photo expedition that had grown too large for him to do alone. So I said yes, and I did it for free because I wanted the experience, and I knew that he would do an amazing amount of work to make it a perfect trip for his clients. So I started researching as much as I could to learn as much as I could since I'd never been there. And the momentum of that caused me to roll into 3 weeks of joyful discovery there. Though the trip was physically exhausting, my senses and vision were on fire. And I also felt the deepest reverence for humanity I'd ever felt up until that point. The people were soft and welcoming, and for the most part, they were excited to see Americans, which is pretty rare, and it may become even rarer as we go forward into this administration. India, as most of you know, is also the land of chaotic traffic, daring drivers, and beeping horns. Well, this was the cab ride straight out of the airport. It's done with an early phone, so it's pretty terrible. But it just shows how insane it is to be in a vehicle in this place and what it sounds like. And it's not everyone's cup of tea, but I really thought, my God, this driver is going straight into other people on the highway. Our first cab got straight into the oncoming lane, and at the last minute, he'd veer off. And I said, "Why do you do that? You have plenty of space in your own lane." He said, "Well, we believe in the afterlife." And I realized that's the culture cross right there. And I said, "Well, I don't. So can you stay in your lane, please?" So I asked myself, how can I capture the feel and the energy here in Varanasi? Can I make one photograph that captures that on this entire trip? And I decided to try, and there'd be a lot of ways of doing it. But then I remembered I had a multiple exposure feature in my Fujifilm camera, and I'd never used it. So I'd read up on how to do it on the plane, but I'd never tried it. So I made a photograph that truly, for me, captured the feel of that place. It's rare for me to do something this experimental, but I thought, wouldn't it be fun to layer all of this chaos together and create a photograph that shows a lot of detail as well as the feeling of visual chaos? And even though it's a photograph I would never sell or print, I put it online and got some interesting comments. But what it really meant to me is that I'd tried hard to capture a feeling. As I said, wherever I go, I try to zoom out first. I call it the establishing shot. And I learned to do this working for magazines when I was younger. And it's still something I feel is important. So I always find the highest possible place I can get to. In this case, see that metal tower that's to the right of the frame? Well, guess where I was when I made this shot? Pretty insane. But I thought, why not? There's no standards, there's no OSHA, there's no one to tell me not to do it. So I did it. But what really got me is from this place, I saw a feature in the carnival that they were building that I was really curious about. It was a giant wooden bowl. And this is what happens inside the bowl. There's a door that opens. You can see it at the top of the frame. It's opened by a crack. And motorcycles go in. And this fella actually drives around in a circle till he goes up the wall of the bowl. Using centrifugal force, he's able to ride that way. And then another one goes the opposite direction. And what they do, this was during the practice session, what they do is one of them carries a machete in his mouth with the blade facing outwards, and the other carries money in his mouth. And they go so close that the object is to cut the money with the machete. So that is pure insanity, but I needed to capture it. So I went down and talked to them a little bit and asked them when they would be performing, and they told me to come back. It was about 100 degrees there, and I was pretty much dying. But I wanted to make a photograph that showed both the audience, the position that shows this precariousness of this event, and try to make a graphic out of it. So I made several shots of them passing past each other. I don't have them in this slideshow, but the thing that I found to my surprise was the reason the car was there is that the car does S curves on the wall around the bikes. So it's truly amazing to be there, frightening to watch, which is the whole point, to attract people to do it. And I thought, how can I make a single frame that makes no sense the first moment you see it? Another thing I was joyful about was seeing this kid jumping up and down on a trampoline. And so I stuck my camera under the net against the mat just above it so I wouldn't get the bounce from it. And I just put my camera on fast frame rate and just kept shooting and composing. And after a while, my card hit the buffer and I couldn't shoot anymore. So I put it on single frame and was more intentional with my moments. And that's when I caught this one. None of the shots that I made on fast frame rate were any good. The one I made on single frame, and I made about 7 of these, seemed to work. So I don't know whether it was luck or instinct or a combination, but my joy was seeing him walking on the Ferris wheel. And then the other one where he's touching it with his hands. And I think these things are magical, but I think they start with an intention. And I think they start with this, tuning into what excites me. And what excites me is a combination of beauty and danger, light, shadow, all the things I can't control are exciting to me. Practicing with my camera so I know it like the back of my hand, actually probably better than the back of my hand, and to know what speeds I need to do the things I want to do. I told you I love visual chaos, and this is proof of it. Things like this attract me, whereas other people who I was traveling with were like, that's gross. I'm not going to go near that. It might fall down on my head. Well, I just think it's super cool that someone sets up a little hardware store like this in a tiny little box with a steel door. The only thing that would make it better is a man sleeping on the floor. Same with this, the bike shop. There's something beautiful and poetic about these circles, framing squares and then other circles in other colors. So I really dig into this, and I only wish I'd made a video because that speaker was blasting away very incongruously to the scene that's behind it. This is my favorite photograph I've ever made traveling. And I'm sharing it with you because it's a good example of intuition and instinct. As I went through the alleys of Varanasi, I kept photographing the textures and the walls, and there were people who would pass me by. But I realized that even though it was very, very hot and humid, and I was very uncomfortable, and I was also hungry, I had to keep moving because something was going to happen if I kept moving. So I came down an alley and I made a left turn and then a right turn, and these men were sitting there. And I immediately, having already preset my camera to 500th of a second, I started shooting. And they looked at me and they waved and they put their thumbs up, and eventually they just sort of went back to talking to each other. And then I saw the cow enter the frame on the left side, so I moved one step to the left. And then I heard something, the door shut, and I moved another step to the left, and there was the girl. And even though she's not completely clear of the wall, and I deeply wish she was, there's something interesting about the way she stuck to it. And shooting with a 24 millimeter lens, so I was fairly close to these men, I was able to get a lot of depth of field. And that's what made this possible. So one of the things I want to talk about a little bit, I should have mentioned it earlier, is that I really design pictures from the background forward, whenever I possibly can. Sometimes that means staying still for a while and waiting to see what happens. But if I see something interesting, I might stop and just wait to see what happens. But other times I feel like a hunter. So I'm either a gardener or a hunter. I'm either gardening slowly and thinking about what's around me and being slow and deliberate, or I'm a hunter and I'm always on the move. And both of those energies really serve me. And if I'm hungry, I'm always more of a hunter. So that's a strange thing that I've noticed about my behavior is when I'm satisfied after a big meal, I'm not as much of a hunter. Sometimes I have to be a little on my edge to feel it. This was the shot I made after that. So really, I stood there until I had nothing else to say. I love all the little details that happen at the edges. And then I traveled further into India, took a bus ride that was about 9 hours, and I ended up in a village where 0 people spoke English, and very few people had even seen Americans before. They immediately thought that I was German or Swiss. But I photographed this woman for a while, and she was beautiful, and she was talkative, even though I couldn't tell what she was saying. And she had betel nut in her lip, and she was just mesmerizing. And it wasn't until I started to leave, and I decided I was going to purchase something from her. She was selling jewelry. And when she pulled apart the robes that held her jewelry, because only a few pieces were in the sun, I realized she had an infant in her robes. And so it's interesting that I was focused on her and didn't realize what she was actually doing, which was being there with her infant. As I met people, I realized that I needed catch lights. I needed better illumination. So I have a little Godox flash that's about the size of a cigarette pack, and I slap it on the camera, or I held it offside, and I just use a little bit of pop in order to keep the detail sharp, in order to photograph in mixed light, especially in shadow. And it serves me very well to do that. But in this location, once I popped the flash, suddenly the kids were all over me. They all wanted to be photographed. And they were beautiful and amazing in their own way. And it was a wonderful experience. This one led me to meet her mom, which went down many, many alleys and warrens, and I knew I'd never find my way back, but somehow I did. It was a strange and scary experience in a way because I was out my edge, I was out of my comfort zone. But I let these things happen because the worst thing that I can think of is coming home and wishing I had done it. This handsome man was a veterinarian for camels. This man was a gravedigger, a Muslim. Most of the people I met were Hindu, but in this part of town, it was very Muslim. And he had a really piercing look, and I really wanted to know more about him, but I couldn't meet anybody who knew him. While I was there, I went to a gym where they were practicing the ancient art of Kushti wrestling. They work so hard to train themselves with incredible weights. Nothing fancy. They don't have gyms with Pelotons and all kinds of fancy stuff. They train the old way. The place that they work has an ochre mud dried on it, and it's part of the religious ceremony. Every single one of these gyms has a temple in it. And these are the weights that they swing around. This man was 82. He's the leader of this gym, and he gets up every morning at 5 and starts practicing, starts exercising. And I went there a few times, each time earlier and earlier, but the light was always tricky. And I decided to resort more to silhouettes and expose them just enough to have some detail. But I wasn't concerned with faces. As I worked, I thought, how can I make something out of this? I don't know the story fully yet. I'm not necessarily welcome here, but in a way I am. They know I'm coming back because I let them know. I gave them pictures and said I'm coming back. I realized after being there for a few days what goes on there and what the rhythm of the day is. And one of my favorite times to be there was after they'd been wrestling and they were healing each other. And this is the man who he has trained now for 4 years. It's awkward to photograph wrestling. There's very little light under these tin-roofed wrestling areas. And in order to keep the torrential rains off, they have to be quite large and they cover most of the light there. So I kept photographing until I found something that looked as awkward as possible. And also, fortunately, I had the silhouettes of the other men who wanted to come in and start their wrestling too. And so I focused on momentary timing and moving around and getting myself completely filthy in the process, but not invading the space, staying a distance away. So I shot this with a 35 millimeter. All the while, I'm watching the background. I can't control the foreground, but I can control my framing. At the place I'd been staying, I saw these incredible, cool old photographs that were up on the walls. And I loved the look of them, the age of them, the details in them, the strange expressions of non-interest. It took a while to make these exposures back then, perhaps, so that maybe they had to hold very still. But I decided to go back to the wrestling gym and make a photograph that sort of honored that tradition. And I even faded the corners and the edges to make the photograph look older. And it was fun. And after a while, I found a place to print it. And so I went back with prints for the man in the center, and he gave them to the individuals to the left and right of him and then behind him. And the last thing he said, and he could speak a little bit of English, was, "I hope you come back and bring some others like you." So that's what I'm going to do next year. A favorite place I've been going since 2014 is Cuba. And I know many photographers, including John and Lisa here, who I'm pretty sure have done trips in Cuba. It's pretty hard not to. It's a phenomenal place, and it's changing rapidly. And I'm starting by showing you one of my favorite photographs I've ever made. And it's because it took me about an hour and a half to make this photograph that actually took a 750th of a second to expose. Because what I was wanting was this fisherman to cast his net in a circle or an oval. Every time he threw it for the first hour, it landed in a pile and splashed, and he'd pull it back in. It's a 35-pound net, and he threw it at least that many times. The reason it worked that he threw it in this harbor was because there was a man with a knife in the water scraping the boat, and then fish would come and eat the algae, and then he'd net the fish. So it was a little bit of a story behind a story. And when I went back to give him a print the next year, I made some 8x10s. I found out that he'd passed away. And so luckily I was able to find another fisherman who knew his family. And I said, please take this to his family. So hopefully they have it. And hopefully it gives them a good sense that someone thought to record their loved one. You can't go wrong there near the water, near the Malecon. There's a lot going on, and you have to be there, and you have to come back and back and back to find the action, to know where to be, and to be there at different times of day. As I said, I love chaos, and I love machines and mechanical things. I love kind of the steampunkness of this, if I will. It's the bike that I always wanted, but could never find. I was there with a National Geographic photographer, Sam Abel, one of my favorite photographers on the planet, and who I'll be seeing in 2 weeks. And he went up the alley first while I was doing something else. And he came back and I said, what'd you get? And he said, nothing. It was a chaotic mess and no one would look at me. I said, okay, well, I'll see you back at the meeting point. And I spent about a half an hour with these people, taking a lot of jeering from them and kind of a lot of goofy expressions. And they wanted to see what was in the camera. They thought it was a film camera. I showed them the pictures on the back. And after a while, they just went back to doing what they're doing. And I made a lot of photographs like this. And even though they're geometrically strange because they're so spread out from the wide angle, I really love the activity in them and all the different people looking at me, and then in the background where people are not. And it's just one of my favorite photographs of the people playing the dominoes in Cuba. This guy on the lower left, I love that he's looking into the frame because he wouldn't leave me alone. He kept wanting me to give him pens and money and all kinds of things. He even told me I could have his sister if I wanted for a few hours. But he was quite a character, and I was lucky that I caught him in the frame. This man I met near a boxing gym, and unfortunately he was pretty sick. So he said, look, and I can't walk you around the streets today, but you can come in and photograph my place. And I loved his eclectic design, his reverence for strangeness, and his reverence for collecting, his reverence for music. It was funny to me that he had an American flag there, but this was 2 years after Obama and the Rolling Stones had been to Cuba. His dream was always to go to America. Unfortunately, he never made it. I call this photo Old Yeller, after the book that I read as a kid. But sometimes those gestures are what you've got to be ready for, and you never know when they're going to happen. This woman was just simply walking down the street when suddenly she backed up against the door and started yelling. And I was very fortunate to have that moment. Another favorite photograph, especially from Cuba, is this shot of a barber. They're everywhere. They work in the foyers, they work in the basements, they work in every doorway pretty much. And hair styling is a very important thing to Cubans. They love to look good. And I love this sort of a Renaissance painting feel of the left. But I made the photograph first of the barber and his client, and I had been pretty close making it, and I didn't consider the rest of the place until I saw the woman. And so I stepped back about 10 feet, shifted, changed my aperture, and included her in the frame. And for me, it just tells a deeper story of this place. So I always shoot vertical and horizontal. I always look around before I leave and see, is there one more picture? Is there a dog about to come out of nowhere and race toward me? Is there something that's going to happen that'll be cooler than the thing I just saw? Like I said, I love gestures. I love angles. I love the triangle that happens with these people. They came from either side of the frame towards each other when I was doing nothing but photographing the zapatero, the shoe repairman. So suddenly this picture came alive in the rhythm of Cuba. I could never have made any of these photographs with my photographer travelers with me. So I always spend a week before and a few days after as much as I can to photograph in complete aloneness or with one other person who thinks the way I do and who also likes space. It's very hard for my ADD mind to work the way it wants to work with photography if I have anyone or anything else on my mind. So it's all negotiation. Time alone, time with friends, time with clients. Time to just sink into who you are and what you need. Time to get out in nature, into beautiful light, to a place that looks like it's stepped out of time. Time to find the ironic and strange hilariousness that you think at first this was done for tourists, but it's not. These guys really hang out like this. I like to photograph the elderly people. I think they're really interesting. And when I can, I get stories from them. I do that everywhere I travel. Most of the time, the women will not let me photograph them. They have too much pride or vanity. I'm not sure. So each time I am able to convince one, sometimes it means coming back with something to give. I use that photo to get me the next one and the next one and the next one. And I worked with this lady for almost 2 years, staying at her daughter's B&B until she finally allowed me to photograph her only because her grandson was there. And I love the tension of her fingertips on his belly. That little bit of detail is, to me, the contact point between them, the way she's holding him and how joyful he is. And she's not, but I don't care. She's looking at me with sternness and a little bit of curiosity. And I realized, God, I don't think I've ever seen her smile in the 2 years I've known her. So for me, this picture is authentic to me, authentic to the baby, and authentic to her. And I think that's why I love it. What does this picture feel like to me? It feels like a combination of mystery, maybe a little bit of loneliness, maybe a little bit of foreboding, maybe just the rhythm of life at night. One of my favorite things to do is travel at night alone in the woods, in the city, no matter where it is, and just feel the space. See what minimal light does to my mind, my senses, my fear. Photographing this scene was interesting. You can see a couple of other photographers on the left there from my group. And it really was hard to shoot. There's very little light there. It was the blue hour, pretty or close to the blue hour, so there wasn't any light. But luckily, partway through this act, and we were all struggling to try to make meaningful pictures, this man started to spit fire, and that was what I had been waiting for. I had no idea it was going to happen, but I was praying that something would let me photograph these dances, this practice of Banrata, a dance group. So you'd sometimes have to forget about the disappointment of not having the light you want, and something magical will happen if you just stick around. Intuition, something I think about a lot. I heard music in the streets a couple blocks away after wandering on a hot day in Havana. And I thought, I'm going to go find out what's going on because wherever there's loud music, there's people doing something. And I was right. That girl on the right and her sister were twerking in the doorway. They were playing lots of loud music that was on the streets out of the frame here. And then by the time I got there, they stopped after a few videos of them and showing them what I'd shot. And then the boys came out from nowhere behind cars and started to attack each other in mock sort of they were goofing around like they were in a mafia movie, kind of pretending to wrestle each other and put a gun to their heads. It was all just gesture and goofing around, things I remember doing as a kid. And I hung out with them for a while. They tackled me a few times. They wanted to see what was in my camera. They grabbed it from me. It was all part of the horseplay that was necessary for them to trust me. And after showing them a lot of photographs and goofing off, I started to direct them. And that didn't work because they're little boys. So finally, I at least asked them to get up against the wall. And you can see that that didn't work. But what it did was at least coalesce them together from being all over the streets. And at the time, they were yelling and screaming. And finally, the older boy came out and he yelled at one of them. And it was that moment that I was able to somehow freeze that really has meaning to me for this photograph. Lots going on, and I love the fact that there are so many players in the stage of this photograph. You can see the direct line between the elder brother's eye and the boy who's looking up at him. And then the boy who's flashing me the peace sign in the center. So beautiful. I call this luck and sometimes intuited luck. I don't know what it is. I'm lucky when it happens, but it doesn't happen if I stay home on the internet, that's for sure. Practice being yourself and define your artistic vision. What draws you in? What stories do you naturally tell? What emotions do you want to evoke? These are things I mentioned before. What influences you? Keep these things in mind and more. You are there and you feel it and see it. You choose how you want to express it through your own personal lens, not just your camera's lens. How long might it take you to make your very best photographs? Well, most of your life until the shutter goes click. So I'm returning to this slide because it's partly the reason I do things in public on Zoom. These are some workshops coming up, and I wanted to let you know that if you hit that QR code with your phone, you can go to my website, which is davidjulianworkshops.com, and there's a form there that QR code leads to. And if you fill it out, some of you already have, otherwise you wouldn't get the link I sent you tonight. But this is a slide that I use wherever I do talks, and it's resulted in a lot of new friends and some travelers as well. And so what I really hope is that I see several of you again on some of my trips or at TCNW on Capitol Hill or in the galleries down in Pioneer Square or somewhere where we can get together and do what we do best, which is shoot or talk about it. Trade stories. So the Palouse is the next thing coming up in June. The Art and Soul of North Vietnam for rice harvest in the north, September 30th to October 14th, with an extension October 14th to 17th to the coast. The Art and Soul of Western Cuba back in December for I think it's my 11th time. And next year, the Art and Soul of Varanasi and Agra. Other than that, I'll be in Maine twice this summer, back to back, 2 weeks, late June, early July, for the art of creating in-camera layered images. That's the multiple exposures, but it's gone on steroids since I made that shot in India. You can do incredible things and they're inventive. And I'm going to come back and do another meetup presentation about that in a few weeks. The other one I'm doing is the Inquisitive Lens, authentic storytelling for traveling photographers. It's really a full week of working with me on the coast of Maine, meeting people and telling their stories, both in photographs and sometimes audio, in order to get the true story to embellish the photographs with later. So it takes the principles of what you saw tonight and it expands it into a week of working together, actually 5 days. At the end of that, we have a big lobster dinner and everyone goes home fat and happy. Another thing that I love to do, as I hinted at the beginning, is I work in composites. And so every once in a while, people will contact me and say, when are you going to do another Photoshop collage? So I'm going to set that up probably this August. And if that interests you, please drop me a line, let me know. And this is the QR code that you guys don't really need to hit right now, but it's on here for, as I said, other reasons.